Similar to modern times, being awarded a decoration in ancient Rome was the highest symbol of recognition for a scholar's dedication and loyalty. Of all the Roman combatants, one stands out as the most decorated in the entire Roman army. Today's video will feature the story of Spurius Ligustinus. He received 34 awards for acts of bravery in combat and was also honored with 6 civic crowns throughout his career in the Roman army. During the Roman Republic, the civic crown held significant importance for citizens. It was regarded as the second highest military decoration that a soldier could be awarded. Obtaining the civic crown was an arduous task. In order to be considered for this prestigious honor, a soldier had to not only save the life of a Roman citizen, but also defeat their opponent and ensure the preservation of the battle site. Furthermore, the individual who was rescued was required to publicly declare the heroic deed, thus adding to the challenge of obtaining the crown. Spurius Ligustinus, who hailed from the Italian peninsula's mountainous region, lived during the 2nd century BC and had a modest upbringing. He was born in the Sabina province, in a hut located on a small country estate that was inherited from his father. In 200 BC, during the consulship of Publius Sulpicius Galba and Gaius Aurelius, Spurius Ligustinus made the decision to enlist in the Roman army. He was tasked with fighting against the Macedonians, who were led by King Philip V. During this time, King Philip V was an ally of Hannibal Barca. Under the leadership of General Titus Flaminius, Spurius Ligustinus and his fellow legionaries achieved a significant triumph over Philip V at the Battle of Cynosphalae. This marked a major victory for the Roman legions against the Macedonian phalanxes. During this event, Philip was compelled to agree to a peace treaty, resulting in Macedonia becoming a subordinate state under the authority of the Roman Empire. Titus Flaminius was impressed by the courage and bravery displayed by his soldier Spurius. As a result, he decided to promote him to the position of centurion of the 10th Manipul of the Hastati, which was a prominent infantry class within the Roman army. Spurius received this promotion only 3 years after enlisting in the Roman army. Following the Macedonian defeat, he willingly volunteered to participate in the Hispania campaign during the consulate of Cato the Elder. The Hispania campaign was a success, and, as a result, the Senate decreed a 3-day ceremony for all of Cato's soldiers. In 194 BC, they returned to Rome and were honored with a Roman triumph. At the parade, numerous valuable items were displayed, and Cato distributed the prize money among his soldiers. Spurius, who was already reasonably wealthy, had been promoted for his bravery to the position of centurion of the 1st Legion of the Hastati. In 191 BC, following his campaign in Hispania, Spurius Ligustinus offered to serve in the army under the leadership of the Roman general Manius Acilius Glabrio. They engaged in a battle against the Aetolians, who were under the leadership of King Antiochus III the Great. During that period, Hannibal had sought refuge with Antiochus III after his loss in the Second Punic War. Upon the conclusion of the campaign, Rome emerged victorious once more, and, as a result, Spurius was promoted to the esteemed rank of the centurion of the 1st Legion of veteran legionaries. Throughout his 22-year career in the army, he participated in multiple campaigns and gained the respect and admiration of his superiors. As Spurius neared the end of his career, he was presented with the chance to be nominated for a final promotion within the Roman army. He and his generals submitted their arguments to the consulate in order to be promoted to the rank of centurion primus pilus, which was the highest rank attainable for a common soldier in the Roman army during that era. Spurius had the chance to deliver a poignant speech before the most prominent Roman officials on that particular occasion. He declared, "I will ensure that no man exceeds me in courage, as I have consistently done, as attested by my commanders and fellow campaigners." The consulate was moved by his words and forwarded the proposal to the Senate, which ultimately sanctioned Spurius's promotion to centurion primus pilus. Throughout his career, Spurius Ligustinus participated in 1 Roman triumph, was promoted to primus pilus, and received 34 awards for acts of bravery along with 6 civic crowns. It's not surprising that he holds the record for being the most decorated soldier in the history of the Roman army. These men kept the highest symbol of Rome's honor in their hands, and if they lost it, Rome would also lose the war. These were the Aquila Feri, or Eagle Bearers. the ultimate symbols of honor and unity for Rome's legions. These men enjoyed an enviable position, as their responsibility to protect the eagle banner was both a matter of duty and personal status. The eagle, the legion's most prized badge, was set on a narrow trapezoidal base and hoisted on a tall pole. With its wings held high and a laurel wreath, the eagle represented not only the legion's identity, but also its invincibility. The Aquiliferi, besides their symbolic role, had a lofty status within the Roman ranks. They were graded just below the centurions, but were above the optiones and were paid twice the salary of an ordinary legionnaire, which indicated the significance of their role in uniting the legion. They dressed in a distinctive lion skin, making them easily identifiable among the Roman ranks. One can imagine that the eagle standard-bearer was a high-value target for the enemy, and frequently their main target during battle. However, the prestige and recognition attached to this position were second to none, and many were willing to risk everything for this honor. Throughout the campaigns and battles that molded the Roman Empire, the Aquiliferi did not go down in disgrace and displayed exceptional courage and bravery. One of the most striking examples was a difficult moment when Caesar's legions landed in Britannia. Julius Caesar wrote about a valiant Aquilifer who, faced with ferocious Briton resistance, dashed towards the shore with his eagle to inspire his fellow soldiers. This shows how much unshakable devotion and courage these soldiers had. While their glory was beyond reproach, historical records also document some of the tragedies that befell these guardians. The heroic death of Lucius Petrosidas, who sacrificed his life to protect the Roman eagle against a multitude of enemies, is one such example. And the Aquiliferi knew that, if they were to lose the eagle, Rome would also lose the battle. The story of the Roman Aquiliferi is still a prime demonstration of how important standards and badges were to the legions. These soldiers used neither sword nor shield in battle. In other words, the Roman army musicians, or buccinatori. Music was more than just a way of expressing art in the Roman legions. It was also a vital tool for communicating and keeping the Roman legions organized during military operations. Indeed, there was a group of musicians among the ranks of the legionaries who fulfilled a crucial role and relayed life-saving orders by means of specific instruments. Notwithstanding their importance, these musicians' presence and role was not given the recognition it merited in historical accounts. These musicians' most important duty was to ensure that the Roman army's maneuvers and strategies were precisely and efficiently carried out. Of course, communication during battle is very important, so orders must be given clearly and quickly. To make sure that these messages could be easily understood and rapidly spread, the legions had musicians. They were left without weapons, and the only thing they used was the litus, a leather-bound wooden trumpet, a cornet, and a brass horn about 3 meters long. Using these instruments, the musicians efficiently and clearly sent out the commands needed to orchestrate battle maneuvers. Musicians also used these instruments to issue a special signal, known as a classicum, to the soldiers. When this call was made, all the soldiers had to mobilize immediately. When it came to their attire, the musicians were dressed in leather vests over their tunics, with bearskin cloaks covering their helmets. This meant they could be easily identified by other legionnaires. All Roman soldiers highly respected the musicians' importance when carrying out military operations. Frontinus even tells a remarkable story about a time when a Roman general was under siege by the enemy and used a strategy with his musician to escape. The general allowed him to play the vigils for several hours, confusing the enemy and allowing the general to flee during the night. In fact, not many records survive of these soldiers playing music during the marches. Nonetheless, they play a vital role as signalmen, making sure that the right orders were given at the right time, preventing mistakes and ensuring efficient combat tactics. Deep within the expansive Roman army, one group of fearless officers held a central commanding position in the mighty cavalry troops, the Decurions. These skilled leaders oversaw commanding squadrons of horsemen and showed an unwavering commitment to the empire and its legions. With his assignment tied directly to the command of 10 men, the Decurion held a vital position as a junior officer responsible for commanding a cavalry corps in the legions and auxiliary mounted units. The Decurions' history stretches back to the Roman Republic, when a legion called Polybian had a cavalry component of 10 groups of 30 men each. 3 Decurions, elected by the members of the squadron themselves, were assigned the leadership of these units. Their role was essential. As commanders, the Decurions epitomized the courage and skill of Roman cavalry. As Rome transitioned into the empire, the Decurions remained a vital part of the military hierarchy. Entrusted with running the cavalry classes, they were highly trained professionals who secured the effectiveness and discipline of the imperial legions in their campaigns and battles. Whereas a Roman imperial legion contained a small cavalry arm of just 120 men, made up of 4 classes, the auxiliary unit, staffed by non-citizens of the imperial army, were home to the vast majority of the Decurions. They were tasked with commanding elite cavalry units, such as wings or equitata cohorts, extremely important for the army's lines of defense. During the imperial period, the Decurions were given more responsibility, and each cavalry unit, whether a squadron or a class, consisted of 30 men, supervised by 2 officers, and led by a Decurion. Grouped together, these squadrons formed a cavalry wing. Each comprised 480 horsemen, the equivalent of 16 classes and 16 Decurions, all under the command of a prefect. The Decurion was directly under the cavalry prefect and ensured that the cavalry strategies and tactics were carried out with pinpoint accuracy. Many of the Decurions of the auxiliary cavalry had formerly served as legionaries, having brought with them a great deal of experience and skill in combat. One outstanding example of this leadership and bravery legacy is the 2nd century Decurion Titus Callidius. He initially joined a legion at 24 and, with skill and determination, rose to become Decurion of the cavalry squadron of the Legio XV Apollinaris. His sterling work led him to being transferred as senior Decurion to the Cohors I Apollinarum, an auxiliary unit of equites established in Carnutum, cementing his reputation as a fearless and revered leader. Notwithstanding the stormy course of the conflict, Callidius displayed unwavering loyalty to his duty and unit, repeatedly joining the Cohors I Apollinarum even after the transfer of the Legio XV Apollinaris to the east. His untiring commitment to the Roman army throughout 34 years of service is a prime example of the unrivaled dedication that defined the Roman Decurions of the time. But despite their importance, the Decurions in the imperial army had a lower social status than the Decurions in the Republican cavalry. Many of them were plebeians or members of native tribal aristocracies, reflecting the change in social and political status within the empire, which was increasingly growing. The Decurions' work became essential for defending the Roman Empire.
There are notable personalities in Roman history who have earned distinction for their bravery and dedication to service. Publius Sextius Baculus was one such person, a primus pilus centurion who served the 12th Roman legion during Caesar's conquest of Gaul. Baculus's prowess was outstanding, especially when he rescued the life of his general Julius Caesar. Historical sources, and especially Caesar's remarks from Gaul, depict Baculus as a fearless warrior, ready to stand up and fight to the death under Caesar's leadership. Caesar, in his own words, described how Baculus endured bloody battles, even when he was gravely injured. Such was the case, for example, when fighting the Nervii in 57 BC. Also, according to Caesar, after he had spoken to the 10th Legion, he headed to the right side of the battlefield. That was where he found his men in trouble, and the 12th Legion soldiers were pushing at the place where they had grouped their banners. The circumstances were chaotic. Every single leader of the 4th cohort had fallen. The standard bearer had been slain, and the flag had been lost. Across the other cohorts, most leaders were also wounded or dead, including Baculus, who was now so severely hurt that he could barely stand. Furthermore, some soldiers in the rear retreated from the battle, whereas at the front the enemies kept attacking. No reinforcements were at hand, and the situation was hopeless. Baculus was brought to a garrison to receive medical treatment for his injuries. He was left without food for 4 days, but, worried about his own safety and that of everyone else, he left his tent to face the Nervii. Once he got back into the battle, Baculus took the shield of a soldier from the rear rows, since he had lost his own. Showing tremendous fortitude, he dashed forward and, summoning the centurions by name and emboldening the soldiers, ordered them to charge. His return instilled the soldiers with confidence and spurred them on to fight. Each man was resolved to fulfill his duty under the watchful eye of his commander, even in the direst of conditions. Baculus's leadership briefly relieved the pressure from the Nervi. Nevertheless, Baculus's serious injuries made him pass out, and he was saved by other soldiers who carried him away from the front line. 5 years later, a similar scenario unfolded, and this time Caesar was fighting the Germanic tribe of the Sicambri in 52 BC. After the legions had been fighting for more than 6 hours, the soldiers were running on fumes and had no supplies left. Meanwhile, the Sicambri intensified their attack and started tearing holes in the legion's defensive barrier, plugging the gaps. The predicament was desperate, and there seemed to be no way out. Baculus, together with a military tribune named Gaius Volusinus, went to one of Caesar's legates and explained that there was only one option for escape: to pull off a last-ditch effort. They swiftly assembled the centurions and instructed the soldiers to stop fighting for a moment, just to protect themselves from enemy shells, rest, and get ready. Once a signal was given, they would withdraw from the camp and stake all hope of survival on their own valor. Baculus never backed down in these two events and led his men with resolve. He commanded the respect and admiration of his soldiers, who called him the Staff, a nickname associated with his surname, and with the vine staff that the centurions bore as a symbol of their rank. Some historical accounts affirm that Baculus saved Julius Caesar's life by killing an enemy warrior who was about to pounce on the general. Caesar therefore admired Baculus greatly, and it is no wonder that, in his writings in Gaul, he called him the strongest man. Interestingly, Baculus and other centurion called Balventius are the only ones among the Primus Pilus centurions whom Caesar praises by name in his writings. This special acknowledgement stresses Baculus's remarkable strength and ability as a military leader. Details of Baculus's death are unclear. Some have suggested that he may have taken his own life after Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, or that he was killed in the Battle of Philippi, fighting on the side of Mark Antony's supporters against Caesar's enemies. But these theories are contradictory and cannot be deemed reliable. However, there is no disputing the fact that Baculus is a striking example of the courage and commitment of Roman soldiers back then, leaving a long-lasting mark on Rome's history. And I'll add on the side a hint about the story of another centurion who fought single-handedly against the Praetorian Guard to protect the emperor. The Vigiles were units established during Augustus's tenure in ancient Rome, in charge of firefighting and handling public safety issues. This video will take a closer look at their duties and organization. The Vigiles were originally assembled from slave forces and later organized as an urban military unit largely consisting of Roman citizens. They had permanent camps and equipment depots throughout the city of Rome, where they patrolled the streets every night. Their key role was to fight fires owing to the heightened risk in Rome, especially due to the widespread use of wooden buildings. The Vigiles were established in 6 AD as a response to fire frequency in overcrowded Rome. General Crassus had previously financially profited from the situation by purchasing burning houses and then reselling them at higher prices. On the other hand, the ideal Ignatius Rufus also set up a team of slaves to fight fires, but perhaps with motivations more geared towards public safety. He was, however, sentenced to death by the Senate for conspiring against the state. Rome tried different approaches to mitigate this security concern, including setting up teams of slaves headed by wealthy men, known as Tresviri Nocturni. But the need for a full-time state team was obvious due to the high fire risk in the city. During Augustus's rule in Rome, slaves were reorganized, resulting in a 600-man force duly instructed to fight fires in emergency situations. Augustus split this force into 14 areas, each made up of its own teams of highly specialized firefighting slaves. led by deputy masters. While this restructuring marked a significant step up from the previous system, coordination challenges between the teams persisted. Augustus accordingly decided to appoint the Vigiles as an urban military unit tasked with fighting fires and preserving order in the streets. The Vigiles consisted of former slaves, with their officers selected from the Roman army's veterans. The Vigiles were divided into 7 cohorts, each comprising around 1,000 men, under the leadership of an equestrian tribune. Within each cohort, there was a subdivision into 7 units, each commanded by a centurion. The supreme command of this corps rested with an equestrian prefect known as Praefectus Vigilum. Under subsequent governments, the Vigiles served for between 3 and 6 years, after which they were entitled to Roman citizenship. On some occasions, the unit started accepting citizens, which resulted in its size increasing. The Vigiles kept a city camp, and their equipment was stored in premises called excubitors in each zone. They carried out night patrols, looking for fires and detaining suspects, taking them to the city mayor for trial. Considering the limited equipment available at the time and the shortage of resources to fight fires more effectively, the Vigiles' leading role was to detect fires before they could spread. Preventive measures were also adopted, such as limiting the height of Roman buildings and increasing the space between them, to reduce the risk of fire spreading. In severe fires, the Vigiles used a variety of rudimentary devices, such as pots and water pumps, to control the flames. They also used axes, catapults, and ballistae to tear down buildings close to the fire to avoid it spreading out of control. These measures were essential to minimize the damage, given the technological limitations of the time. While some officers of the Vigiles attained prestigious ranks in other urban units and in the Praetorian Guard, they were not regarded by the Romans as combat soldiers. In the 4th century AD, the Vigiles unit was disbanded and replaced by specialized guilds tasked with firefighting. This unit certainly played a crucial role in Rome's safety, particularly considering the challenges that fires posed back then. Why did this general not just refuse to be emperor once, but 3 times? If you don't know, we're talking about General Tiberius Claudius Pompeianus, son-in-law and one of the closest counselors of Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Born in Antioch, Syria in the early 2nd century AD, Pompeianus rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most respected generals of his time. His father was a high-ranking member of the equestrian order under the senatorial class, and, over time, managed to grant Pompeianus Roman citizenship during Claudius's tenure. Pompeianus rose to prominence during the 161–166 Roman-Parthian War, where he was around 35 years old and under the command of Emperor Lucius Verus, who ruled alongside Marcus Aurelius. Pompeianus's remarkable service led him to the post of senator, and he then served as consul in 162 AD. Having won the trust of Marcus Aurelius, Pompeianus was appointed military governor of Pannonia Inferior following the Parthian campaign. From 164 to 168, he faced a major challenge when a Lombard invasion was followed by a greater threat from the Marcomanni. His victory over the Lombards set him apart as a military leader, and he quickly became a close advisor to Marcus Aurelius. By 169, Lucius Verus had fallen seriously ill and died, leaving Marcus Aurelius's daughter a widow. Her name was Lucilla, and I think you may remember her from the movie Gladiator. As she was the emperor's daughter and still quite young, only 21 years old, Marcus Aurelius arranged a marriage between Lucilla and Pompeianus, who at the time had already achieved the title of consul twice. His marriage to Lucilla solidified Pompeianus's position and attached him to the Nerva Antonine dynasty. Marcus Aurelius's trust in Pompeianus became such that the emperor also invited him to become Caesar and heir, but Pompeianus refused the offer, choosing instead to continue serving as a general. This bit surely reminds us of the scene in the movie Gladiator in which Marcus Aurelius offers Maximus the imperial throne. Indeed, this was the first of Pompeianus's 3 refusals to be emperor. A decade passed, and in 180 AD, Marcus Aurelius died. Commodus, who was 18 at the time, seized the throne. As an experienced general, Pompeianus attempted to advise Commodus to remain on the Danube frontier until the conquest of the Marcomanni had been completed, just as Marcus Aurelius had intended. But the young emperor had little interest in continuing the war and decided to make a peace agreement with the Marcomanni, returning to Rome in the fall of 180. 2 years later, Commodus faced a conspiracy led by his sister Lucilla. The assassination attempt was a failure, resulting in Lucilla and the other conspirators being executed. Since there was no proof of his participation in the plot, Pompeianus's life was spared. Following this conspiracy, Pompeianus, alleging old age and sight problems, withdrew from public life. His decision was motivated not only by the need to avoid retaliation, but also by the growing political instability in Rome. He took shelter on his land in Italy, far from the machinations of imperial power. When Commodus died in 192, Pompeianus returned to Rome and retook his post in the Senate. Pertinax, then urban prefect, offered the imperial throne to Pompeianus, posing a choice that could have changed the course of Roman history. With his remarkable political acumen, Pompeianus surprised everyone by rejecting the offer for the second time, refusing to give in to the temptation of power. Pertinax capitalized on the power vacuum and agreed to be proclaimed emperor, only to be killed by the Praetorian Guard 87 days later. That was when the ambitious senator Didius Julianus succeeded in bribing the Praetorians to ascend the throne. But his quest for backing among the troops of the Roman army was met with some challenges, and Julian became afraid that he would suffer the same fate as Pertinax. Facing this threat to his life, Julianus turned to Pompeianus with an offer to become co-emperor with him. For the third time, Pompeianus refused the offer, saying that he was old and had sight problems, which of course left Julianus vulnerable. On June 1st, 192, the senators called on the soldiers to enter the imperial palace and assassinate Didius Julianus. Pompeianus cleverly anticipated the instability and political chaos in Rome and opted to remain out of the limelight, living the rest of his life quietly. Roman forts were instrumental for the Roman Empire's military strategy. They were built to withstand enemy raids and provided a safe place to house soldiers, as well as to store essential supplies such as food, weapons, and administrative records. This video will look at where these camps were built and what strategy the Romans used to build them so fast. Known as castrum, Roman forts served multiple purposes throughout the Roman Empire. They were built in strategic spots, mainly along the empire's borders, such as the Danube and Rhine rivers, to ward off enemy raids. Some forts were also built during prolonged sieges, while others were founded in provinces to maintain control over conquered peoples and forestall rebellions. Forts varied in size, from small temporary camps to large fortifications able to accommodate up to 2 legions. To handle long-term needs, many of these forts were sited near cities or settlements, which developed around the forts. These trade centers made it possible for merchants to supply Roman soldiers with equipment and goods, buying loot and other products in return. Over time, some of these settlements developed into cities during the Middle Ages, underlining the lasting influence of the Roman military footprint on the development of surrounding areas. While ranging in detail, Roman forts shared common features. They were generally rectangular, with rounded corners, and had wooden walls, later reinforced with stone on a foundation of earth. Surrounding the perimeter was a ditch, and the earth taken from it was used to form a wall. The forts had 4 main gates and strategically positioned towers. From the 3rd century AD, the towers were designed outside the walls to enable a better angle of fire, due to the increased use of artillery weapons. There were lanes inside the fort that formed a T-shaped layout, known as the Via Praetoria and Via Principalis. The main building, called the Principia, was placed where the 2 streets met. The fort's left and right side gates were known as the Porta Principalis Sinistra and the Porta Principalis Dextra. The rear gate was known as the Porta Decumana and led straight to the headquarters building or the commander's tent. The front gate was called the Porta Praetoria. The Roman fort gates were well designed, with 2 arched entries, wooden doors that could be shut, and possibly serve as a firewall. They were internally locked and had multi-story towers, plus separate defense moats. Although these were defensive precautions, the forts were not intended to withstand prolonged sieges, but rather to repel makeshift enemy attacks. Whenever they encountered large enemy forces, Roman troops mobilized to confront them in the open, since most of Rome's opponents were unable to conduct successful sieges, except for the Sassanid Empire. Challenges increased during the Byzantine Empire as the threat of marauders spread, leading to changes in fort design. Gates were narrowed, curved protective towers, as well as fan-shaped towers at the corners, and facilities for catapults were all introduced, especially in coastal areas, such as the Saxon coast of Britain, to bolster the defense of these fortifications. When needed, Roman soldiers often built temporary camps. They were quickly constructed, taking only a few hours, and served several purposes, such as resting, preparing for battles, sieges, and winter barracks. 10 men from each centuria were charged with building them, supervised by a military surveyor who chose a suitable site, considering criteria such as easy access, proximity to water sources, and high ground for tactical reasons. Permanent forts, which were walled, contained barracks for legionaries and cavalry, lodging for the commander and his family called a praetorium, and occasionally for tribunes. They also had elevated structures named horios to store food and protect it from humidity. Roman forts possessed several internal facilities, including workshops, hospitals, cisterns, markets, and, in a few cases, Roman baths, but these were often located outside the forts, owing to the risk of fire. There was a wide avenue around these internal structures to protect them from enemy raids. The center of the fort was occupied by the Principia, the headquarters building, comprising a basilica, corridors, a court, and recreation rooms for the staff, offices, and a shrine for the legions or units' banners. There were also armories and an underground vault for storing the fort's cash reserves. These forts were vital in providing logistical support for the Roman legions. Without them, it would have been extremely difficult for the Roman Empire to keep all its borders under control.
The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest is one of the most devastating events in Roman military history. The shattering debacle inflicted by Arminius' betrayal resulted in the annihilation of 3 Roman legions. With this video, we will learn more about the beginning and events of this Germanic revolt against Rome. To properly grasp the roots of this Arminius-led uprising, we must go back a few decades. Following Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul, the defeated tribes had been divided into Roman Republic provinces. During the years immediately after Caesar's conquest, the Romans paid scant attention to the Gauls' territories, especially near the border of Germania. This was due to the Roman Republic's infighting. Such neglect led to multiple rebellions by the tribes living there, which the Romans suppressed as time went on. When Augustus was declared by the first Roman emperor, the Roman legions expanded their presence in Gaul, with many stationed on the Rhine frontier. While these troops succeeded in maintaining a degree of order in the empire, they were never able to stop the Germanic invasions. In 16 BC, the leader of the Sicambri tribe led a successful attack against the Roman army. This led to the loss of Legion 5 Alaudes Eagle and prompted a strong backlash from the Roman Empire. Emperor Augustus gradually increased the Roman military presence in Germania in the following years. Drusus, his adopted son, waged a successful campaign against the Sicambri, Frisian, and Chauci tribes in 12 BC, arguably retrieving the lost eagle. Drusus went on a successful raid as far as the River Weser in 11 BC, and reached the Elbe by crossing the Truces territory. In the early 1st AD, Germania was on its way to becoming completely Romanized. Several young Germanic nobles were also joining the legions as auxiliaries in the Roman army. One of these was the son of the Truces chief, who the Romans dubbed Arminius. He led a Trusci detachment of the Roman auxiliary forces around 4 AD, presumably after serving in the Pannonian Wars in the Balkans. Arminius then headed back to northern Germania in 7 or 8 AD, where the Romans controlled the areas of the Rhine and sought to expand their influence in the Weser and Elbe rivers. Arminius was not happy with Drusus's excursion into the Cherusci lands a few years earlier. He also disapproved of Roman culture and thought that the Romans mistreated the Germanic people. Arminius secretly began plotting to unite different Germanic tribes against the Roman Empire. By 7 AD, Publius Quintilius Varus had become the new governor of Germania. Albeit not an experienced military man, Varus was provided with 3 legions, numerous auxiliaries, and cavalry, in case he faced any fighting during his planned peaceful Romanization of Germania. Varus relied on his Germanic allies, including Arminius, unaware that the latter had been secretly plotting against Rome since his return to Germania. He needed to unite the Germanic tribes, which had mutual feuds. Arminius started by convincing communities to ask for Roman help with different local issues. Some needed protection from thieves, others required escorts for supply convoys, and some wanted to avert civil unrest. While many faulted Varus's oppressive rule for the uprising, historians claim that he was trying to do right by the region. He spread his troops out as requested by the Germanics and focused on legal and administrative matters. Varus's strategy consisted of crossing the Rhine, marching towards the Cherusci's territory, resupplying the garrisons along the way, and setting up camp in lands deemed pacified. But now, the Cherusci were able to monitor the Romans' movements, which meant that they would have a longer journey back to their winter headquarters. During the march, the Romans would be vulnerable to an ambush in favorable terrain for Arminius. In 9 AD, external difficulties obliged Varus and his legions to move out of camp. Arminius had launched the attacks himself, unbeknownst to Varus. Arminius advised him to send troops to stop the unrest, splitting up the Roman forces. Having received these reports from Arminius, Varus immediately gathered his army and left to face the enemy. By doing so, Varus undermined his troops by sending out several small detachments, then marching with an army encumbered by a large baggage convoy and camp followers, including the soldiers' families. Arminius offered Cherusci support, but Segestes, another tribal leader, alerted Varus to a trap planned by Arminius. Segestes wanted him to reject Arminius' offer, arresting him as a traitor. But Varus refused to believe Segestes, possibly because of a personal problem he had with Arminius. Varus perhaps assumed that Segestes was nursing a grudge and wanted revenge. On the morning of September the 7th, 9 AD, the Roman army got ready to leave. Arminius told Varus that he needed to prepare his own forces. Arminius left some Cherusci to act as guides, but they were in fact spies. Varus was unaware that Arminius was assembling a Germanic army, including the Cherusci and Chauci. When they arrived the next day in the Teutoburg forest, the Germanics charged at the Romans. Arminius corralled the enemy soldiers within the forest and a swamp, stopping them from regrouping. The swampy, densely wooded terrain prevented the Roman legions from maneuvering effectively. Varus had made a dreadful mistake by relying on Arminius and aggravated the situation by positioning his legions poorly, underestimating the Germanic tribe's strength and exaggerating his ability to intimidate the rebels. Varus decided to set up camp after a torrential downpour, given how difficult it was to push ahead. He convened his war council to discuss the situation. The Romans attempted to escape, but fell into another of Arminius' traps. The narrow passage between the forest and the swamp had been blocked by a trench and an earthen wall, putting the Germanic alliance at an advantage. A failed attempt to breach the wall led to desertion of some officers and a relentless Germanic offensive. The 30,000-strong army was destroyed without any chance of recovery. Most legionnaires were killed on the spot, while some senior officers were led into the sacred groves and ruthlessly sacrificed. 3 legions, 17, 18, and 19, were massacred, along with 6 cohorts of auxiliary infantry and 3 cavalry wings. Arminius ordered his men to find Varus's body among the dead and sent his head to Maroboduus, chief of the Marcomanni, hoping to influence him to join his revolt. He probably did this because he did not expect a total victory against the Romans, trying to build a tribal coalition for a possible protracted war. But Maroboduus had no interest in such an alliance and sent Varus's head home for a proper burial. Rome was shaken by this defeat, since only the Alps protected the city from a potential Germanic invasion. Suetonius reported that Augustus was profoundly afflicted, lamenting the loss of his men several times. He went into mourning, grew a beard and hair for a month, roaming the palace while banging his head on the walls, crying out, "Quintilius Verus, give me back my legions." Then Augustus summoned his legions to the palace. Legions 1 Germanica and 16 were placed to reinforce the Roman defenses, but legions 17, 18, and 19, destroyed by Arminius, were never rebuilt, and their titles were forever abandoned. The Romans started planning their revenge. Having served in the Roman army, Arminius understood the Romans' ability to bounce back and their unrelenting determination to hunt down their enemies. Following the battle, there were intense negotiations, and Arminius tried to unite the tribes against Rome, while the Romans harshly threatened those who joined. In the following year, 10 AD, Tiberius, Augustus's heir, headed the Roman counterattack. Tiberius was promptly deployed to reinforce the Rhine frontier and massed 8 legions along the provinces of Upper and Lower Germania. Despite expecting a Germanic invasion, Arminius and his troops scattered towards home, displaying their spoils. Tiberius then undertook punitive expeditions against the Germanic tribes. The Roman reputation was severely damaged, requiring years of grueling campaigns to begin to recover. In 11 AD, Germanicus Julius Caesar, who had acquired experience in Pannonia, joined Tiberius on the Rhine frontier. With Augustus aging, Tiberius returned to Rome in 13 AD to assure the succession to the Roman throne. Arminius, notwithstanding his fresh victory, knew that his troops could not match Tiberius's legionaries and shunned direct confrontation. He opted to take refuge in the forests, confounding Roman strategy, which normally sought to attack what was most valuable to the enemy. But Germania had few rich cities or crops to tap into. The Romans made several displays of strength in the following years, but did not try to make a serious conquest of the region. The incursions into Germania were unsuccessful, but they served as a reminder to Arminius that Rome had not forgotten him, despite other internal and cross-border issues. We will see more in a future video about how the Romans, under the leadership of the young general Germanicus, finally managed to take revenge on the Germanic tribes.
Acquiring the famous horse Incitatus was a turning point in Caligula's life, the Roman emperor known for his eventful and extravagant ruling. This particular horse brought with it a new degree of eccentricity and flamboyance to Caligula's inner circle. Incitatus is thought to have been acquired by Caligula around 39 AD, and quickly went on to become a prized member of the imperial court. The horse, a thoroughbred, caught the emperor's eye, and he decided to treat him in a special and exquisite way. Incitatus was given painstaking treatment and attention right from the start. As Suetonius tells it, the horse was kept in a marble stable, a kind of luxury hardly ever seen for an animal, and its feeding was carefully supervised, with a special diet that included the best grains and fodder. Incitatus was also a senator, and enjoyed noble privileges. The horse is said to have been given an ivory trough and fed grain served in silver dishes. Caligula even arranged for the horse to be covered in purple, a color associated with royalty. Cassius Dio further sheds light on Incitatus's story, revealing that the horse, as well as its material comforts, became a priest. Incitatus owned an endless supply of slaves, was surrounded by its personal guards, and also had its own fiefdom. Emperor Caligula often invited Incitatus to his table, personally offering him barley and wine from the golden cup. As is the case with horses, it is a complex and highly unknown figure. It is difficult to pin down exactly how much influence Incitatus had in shaping the Roman Empire's politics as a senator. Historians do not entirely agree on this matter. According to the writings, Incitatus never succeeded in becoming consul, despite Caligula's wishes. To this day, the accuracy of the historical accounts surrounding Incitatus is disputed by scholars. Historians claim that there may have been political pressure from Roman chroniclers, such as Suetonius and Cassius Dio, to portray the Emperor Caligula in a negative light. Distorting the facts may have created a narrative that suited the interests of subsequent emperors. Caligula may also have been playing a kind of practical joke to ridicule the Roman Senate. However, if this story was actually the truth, it certainly attracted people's attention to the emperor, and many may have come to regard him as deranged and outlandish. A special breed of soldier stood out within the mighty Roman army as the guardian of the legion's identity. He was called Vexillarius. Standing tall among the ranks of valiant legionnaires, Vexillarius bore the crucial responsibility of carrying the vexillum, a square cloth flag that displayed the number and title of the unit to which he belonged. The vexillum was not only a visual icon of prestige and glory, but also a rallying badge that united the legionnaires around a common cause. This flag imbued a sense of purpose and identity, reminding all who marched under it not only of their unity and legacy, but also of the glory that could be obtained through unified purpose and determination. One glimpse of this symbol was found in Egypt, where the remnants of a vexillum were unearthed. Made of thick linen dyed a rich scarlet, the vexillum boasted outstanding decorative features. A fine fringe decorated its lower part, while a hem at the top sheltered the crossbar that supported it. Apart from its symbolic role, the term Vexillarius also extended to particularly regal veterans, renowned for their distinction and privileged status within the legion. These soldiers were assigned to a separate company, known as a Vexillario, where they played a crucial role in combat and other exceptional skills required to maintain the cohesion and effectiveness of the Roman forces under the Vexillum banner. Although some Vexillarius served in temporary detachments apart from their parent units, the essence of their role as guardians of the legion's unity and identity was unwavering. Clad in standard Roman armor and a striking helmet decorated with animal pelts such as lion or wolf, their imposing and distinctive presence stressed not only their functional weight, but also their steadfast dedication to the legion and the empire. The vexillum was a source of inspiration on the Roman Empire's battlefields, symbolizing the legion's unyielding strength and relentless drive for victory.
Arminius, the man who had brought the Romans to their knees in Teutoburg, was on one side. Germanicus, the most powerful Roman general in Rome at the time, was on the other, determined to seek revenge for the deaths of his men in Teutoburg. Who would win this battle? Nearly 5 years have now passed since the Teutoburg catastrophe, and until 14 AD, the Romans had not achieved any major victories over the Germanics. Several tribes saw it as particularly useful to start allying themselves with Arminius against Roman control. There were even Cherusci, headed by their uncle, Inguiomer, who hadn't supported the initial attack, but who then joined Arminius' side. In spite of this growing support, Segestes, a leader of the Cherusci, and also Arminius' father-in-law, still preferred to remain loyal to Rome. And it is obvious that this eventually undermined his authority and popularity within the tribe. Retaliating for this endorsement, Arminius ordered his allies to arrest his father-in-law. Segestes then somehow managed to send his own son, Segimundus, to ask the general Germanicus for help. With Segimundus' assistance, Germanicus succeeded in freeing Segestes and capturing some of Arminius' allies, including his wife Thanelsda, at the time pregnant. One can only picture the moment when Arminius' wife, who also happened to be Segestes' daughter, found herself face to face with her father, who was now free and also on the enemy side. Notwithstanding past grudges, Germanicus, with Segestes' son's defection and some other Germanic warriors who had quit to follow Arminius, spotted an opportunity. All the evidence suggests that not only had this son of Segestes fought against Rome, but that he had also defiled the corpse of the general Publius Varus. Given this rebellious background, the reigning emperor, Tiberius, decided to pardon all those involved. The exiled were not only given a place to live in the empire, but also a lifetime pension. This strategy not only secured the loyalty of these new allies, but also weakened Arminius' position by undercutting his internal support. On hearing that his father-in-law had permitted his pregnant daughter to be imprisoned, Arminius was enraged. As Tacitus put it, Arminius said that the Romans were cowards and lacked the nerve to stand up to him, which is why they went after his wife. At that point, referring to Germanicus, Arminius said, "We have defeated Augustus and his heir Tiberius. Why should we cower before an inexperienced teenager and his mutinous army?" Arminius was referencing the rebellion that had taken place among Germanicus's soldiers following Augustus's death. Now having captured some of Arminius's allies, Germanicus decided to escalate his chase. As he pressed on, Arminius took advantage of the rough and muddy terrain and managed once again to attack the Romans in a swampy forest and score a small victory. His uncle, Inguiomer, then suggested attacking the Romans in open terrain, but the attempt was unsuccessful, mainly due to the Roman army's greater experience in such conditions. Throughout the following 2 years, the Romans, led by Germanicus, continued their raids against various Germanic tribes that had allied themselves with Arminius and recovered one of their banners that had been lost. Nonetheless, they were unable to confront Arminius and his soldiers during this period. The Romans' image was heavily tied to their ability to avoid any kind of defeat, however small. Every time they carried out an expedition, it felt as if they were engaging in a mind game. It was not a question of utterly defeating a tribe, but of conveying the idea that the Romans were invincible. When they withdrew strategically, it not only showed their military strength, but also sent a clear message. The Romans were powerful and strong-willed. Yet, with every expedition he undertook, Germanicus faced a challenge: how to achieve a balance between strength and agility in his expeditions. This is why he aimed to cause destruction and spread terror over a wide area, displaying Roman military capabilities. Withdrawing without incurring heavy losses was the crux of this strategy. The objective was to sow fear in the tribes, persuading them that resisting was pointless. Despite not having won any major victories after Teutoburg, the mere fact of having avoided significant defeats boosted Arminius' reputation. Throughout the winter months, Germanicus spent time preparing for battle, uniting all 8 legions into a single force. The empire's western provinces, although faced with challenges, sent grain, horses, and pack animals to strengthen the army. The strategic choice of moving the army by water, sailing along the North Sea coast, and landing inside enemy territory meant that almost 1,000 boats had to be built. The diplomatic campaign to attract Germanic leaders to the Roman side continued as well, resulting in some important defectors, such as Segimer, who was Segestes' brother. Alongside the practical arrangements, Germanicus took advantage of those months to focus his attention on improving the health and morale of his men. He visited the winter barracks hospitals, talked to the soldiers, and extolled their feats of courage, giving them the morale they would need later on. Then, in the spring of 16 AD, Germanicus was set to continue his pursuit and put an end to Arminius for the last time. By joining the squadron in the territory of the Batavi, an allied tribe, the Roman army started preparing for the campaign. By sending a small column to attack the Chatti, Germanicus learned of an attack on the Roman fort close to where Varus's disgrace had taken place. This was a prelude to the ensuing showdown. But before that, the tombs that Germanicus had built for the soldiers in Teutoburg were razed to the ground by native enemies, and this heightened tensions. Arminius found out that the Roman army was assembled at the river Weser. Among the Roman soldiers, there was someone quite special to him, his brother. However, Arminius' brother was not a prisoner, but an auxiliary soldier in the Roman army. His name was Flavus. When Arminius and his father had defeated the legions at Teutoburg in 9 AD, Flavus had not been with them. He was in Illyria, helping the Roman army in an uprising, where he lost one of his eyes. Once Arminius heard that Flavus was with the other soldiers on the river Weser, he attempted to find a way to meet up with his brother. The two succeeded in meeting and talking on the riverbank, but they were unable to reach an agreement. Flavus asked Arminius to surrender, promising that the Romans would have mercy on them. On the other hand, Arminius urged Flavus to stand up for his people and his roots. The two began to argue, and Flavus almost got into a scuffle with Arminius. Arminius realized that his brother had decided to stay loyal to Rome, but he thought, why not try to convince other Roman soldiers to desert the army and come over to my side? He decided to send emissaries to the Roman camp to try to convince the soldiers to desert. To do so, they offered great sums of money, land, and wives. In an attempt to further undermine Roman morale, Arminius presented the offer to desert in Latin, letting it be known that some of the former Roman soldiers were already fighting on his side. As his envoys made this offer, Arminius decided to retreat to a strategic position in a sacred forest. There were rumors among Germanicus' soldiers of a night attack on the Roman camp, and this brought a certain amount of tension. Germanicus took precautions, and decided to keep his legions on alert. As a seasoned general, he knew that his soldiers were probably distressed and afraid. To assess the morale of his troops, Germanicus decided to disguise himself with a hood made of animal skin, silently walking through the tents at night, listening to the soldiers' conversations. As he went around the camp to find out how the soldiers were feeling, Germanicus was surprised by the soldiers' faith in and concern for him as their general. Early the next morning, he addressed his army, presenting a cunning strategy. Having spotted the vulnerable features of the Germanics, he pointed out the effectiveness of the Roman pilum, gladius, and breastplate. The commander instigated the legionnaires to attack quickly and harshly, drawing attention to the Germanics' vulnerability, as they lacked strong armor and shields. The tactical difference between the two armies was obvious, and Germanicus wanted to take advantage of it. Arminius simultaneously drew up a strategy to confront the Romans on the hills of Idistavisso, once again making effective use of the sloping terrain and the woods in his rear. With Gaul and Germanic auxiliaries leading the way, followed by 4 legions under Germanicus, the battle was set to rage. There were also 2 cohorts of the Praetorian Guard and a strategic assortment of cavalry that deployed the Roman army to face the Germanic rebels. Notwithstanding the drawbacks of the terrain, the Romans excelled in battle tactics and managed to push back the Germanics, putting even Arminius in a perilous situation, nearly being captured. Apparently, when the battle begun, some of the Cherusi disobeyed Arminius' orders, dashing forward and quickly being pushed back by Roman cavalry. Under Germanicus, the Roman infantry pressed forward with determination, confronting and repelling the Germanics. Striving to change the tide of battle, Arminius led an attack against the Roman archers, but was met with stiff resistance from the auxiliary heavy infantry. Arminius, wounded and aware of the impending defeat, chose to escape by smearing his face with his own blood to conceal his identity. It was rumored that Germanic auxiliaries, perhaps from the Caucasian tribe, facilitated his escape. The Germanic army, in disarray and under intense Roman attack, suffered significant losses. While Tacitus does not give specific statistics, the Roman casualties were fairly small, and all of Germanicus' soldiers celebrated the victory. Despite the early defeat, the Germanics were far from giving up. They established their position again, choosing strategic terrain between a tricky swamp and a woodland near a river. They built a fence similar to one used in Varus's ambush. The German infantry took cover near the bastion, while the cavalry moved into position in the wooded areas a little further back, ready to attack the Roman rearguard. Fully aware of the enemy presence, the Romans headed by Germanicus decided to fight another battle in open country. Letting the cavalry cover open terrain, they divided the infantry into 2 units. The first attack met with difficulties and some Roman casualties. After rearranging the forces, Germanicus brought in slingers and marksmen, who succeeded in defeating the Germanic warriors who were standing at a longer distance, destroying their shields and armor. Germanicus spearheaded the breakthrough with 2 Praetorian cohorts, while the Roman forces advanced into the woodland terrain to seize this tactical advantage. The Germanics' numerical advantage then became a handicap, as the Romans, more skilled in close combat, managed to turn the tide. Probably still recovering from recent wounds, Arminius took a minor role in the second battle. His uncle, Guiomir, took command, although this did not prevent the Germanics from suffering heavy casualties. At the end of the day, Germanicus withdrew a legion to start setting up camp and raised another trophy to celebrate the victory. This decisive victory prompted some tribes to swear allegiance to the Roman Empire. Following this, Germanicus had the bold idea of bypassing the Germanics by sea to take them by surprise, but it ended up failing. Over 1,000 ships carrying legionnaires to their destination were hit by a storm that destroyed a significant part of the army. Emperor Tiberius, already pleased with the victories achieved and well aware of the risks involved in continuing the campaign, decided it was time to stop. The effort and resources allocated to the temporary conquering of forests and swamplands no longer seemed to justify the endeavor. The quest to conquer Germania had ended, and although he had lost to the Romans, Arminius was also victorious for having succeeded in removing Roman influence from the region. On his return to Rome, Germanicus was celebrated with a triumph, a feast in honor of his victories. Everyone in Rome was keenly anticipating Germanicus' return. Upon his arrival, he was feted with a triumph for his victories. Wearing ceremonial robes, 2 cohorts of the prestigious Praetorian Guard were waiting to welcome him. But such was the respect for the general that all 9 cohorts wanted to attend this historic moment, a mark of respect for the leader who vindicated Rome. The whole Roman celebration unfolded before the eyes of Arminius' son, who was quite young at the time and had been born into captivity. Having successfully warded off the threat of Roman occupation, Arminius had to deal now with tribal fights breaking out again in Germania, and his own uncle and greatest ally Inguinumir now wanted to take over. As a result, Arminius' peace of mind was short-lived, and just 3 years after the Roman troops left Germania in 19 AD, he was killed by his own relatives at the age of 37. By a twist of fate, these were the same people who had made Arminius the supreme leader of the entire Germania. The internal power struggle was so intense that the Cherusci had to beg Rome to intervene and send them a king years later. And do you know who Rome sent? Do you remember Flavius, brother of Arminius? His son, Italicus, was sent by the then Emperor Claudius to be the new Cherusci king. As a result, Rome just had to watch and wait until the Germanics needed its help again. The legendary Legio I Adruix is mostly remembered for having been hurriedly formed by Emperor Nero when he was about to die. This legion was originally assembled with only sailors, the men available at the time. They ended up being unfairly disavowed by Emperor Galba following Nero's death. The story of Legio I Adruix starts in the spring of 68 AD. At that point, Nero, desperately trying to hold on to his throne, had taken the unprecedented decision to call up sailors from the Roman battle fleet based in Misenum on the Italian east coast for legionary service. The legion's banner became the Pegasus to illustrate its strength in numerous campaigns over the following years. But the sailors, albeit having become a legion, could not save the weakened Emperor Nero. With the Praetorian Guard and Germanic bodyguard forces deserting him, and the Senate proclaiming him an enemy of the state and sending troops to arrest him, Nero decided to take his own life in June of that year. In the meantime, the newly formed legion of sailors stayed in Rome, awaiting the forthcoming developments. Since they had no accommodation, these men had to fend for themselves and slept wherever they could around the city. The Senate had already recognized Galba as the new emperor. That fall, he marched from Hispania to Rome, surrounded by an entourage that included his newly formed Legio VII Gemina and a large contingent of cavalry. Misenum sailors were anxious to have their unit officially recognized and wanted Roman citizenship as a bonus. The prospect of this prestigious status led them to seek the new Emperor Galba's approval for that legion. In October 68 AD, as news of the arrival of Galba and his troops spread throughout Rome, all 5,000 sailors of this new legion went to see the new emperor. Galba said he had no time to attend their request immediately. This did not suit the former sailors, and so they decided to carry out an armed revolt inside Rome. Confronted with these men's persistent calls for recognition of this newly formed legion, Galba was pushed into a decisive and, for some, brutal response. Faced with a surging mob, the emperor feared being attacked and ordered his cavalry to charge them mercilessly. The accounts vary, but the death toll is estimated at over 1,000, and the survivors were subjected to a grim fate. The Gallic governor, Vindex, capitalized on the tumultuous moment in Rome and broke out into rebellion, drawing support from different tribes. The city of Lugdunum promptly aligned itself on Vindex's side, while Vienna remained loyal to Rome. However, these cities were riddled with veteran soldiers. The situation worsened when Lugdunum, influenced by the locals, urged the Legio I Adruix to attack Vienna, claiming that the Viennese were foreigners, while they themselves were an ancient colony of Roman legion veterans. Considering this looming danger, Vienna decided to form a local legion, backing the new Emperor Galba. They re-reformed the Legio I Adruix, a unit forged to protect Vienna from attacks sponsored by Lugdunum, although the elders of Vienna claimed that they were simply showing loyalty to the Legio I Italica and its new emperor. The legion was originally recruited in the regions of Gallia Narbonensis and Italy. Then it found itself in different posts, from Misenum and Spain to Mogontiacum and Sirmium, playing a part in crucial campaigns in Dacia and Parthia. The legion's soldiers fought their first battle in 70 AD in what is known as the Revolt of the Batavi, where the soldiers' courage and persistence proved crucial to victory. The legion was present at a number of historical events over the years, from Trajan's Dacian Wars 101 to 106 AD to the Parthian Campaign 114 to 116 AD, and Marcus Aurelius's Germanic Wars 161 to 180 AD. It was under the command of notable leaders, however, such as the future Emperor Pertinax, that the Legio I Adriax achieved its peak. After Pertinax's assassination in 193 AD, the Legio I Adriax joined others on a march to Rome, where the Roman Senate acclaimed 7th Severus as emperor. Perceiving threats to his throne, Severus led his legions, including the I Adriax, on a journey east. Crossing Asia Minor, they defeated Pescennius Niger, reinforcing Severus's rule over the empire. Having consolidated power, the Adriax I returned to Rome, and later, alongside other legions, took part in Severus's Parthian campaigns. In 238 AD, the I Adriax fought a civil war at the siege of Aquileia under Emperor Maximinus Thracianus. Following turbulent events that led to Maximinus, Pupienus, and Balbinus being assassinated, the legions swore allegiance to Gordian III, joining him in the war against the Persians in 244. Following a tragic turn of events, Gordian III was killed near the Euphrates River on February 25, 244 AD, succeeded by Philip the Arab. After Gordian III's death, little is known about I Adriax. Records suggest that it was still active in the 5th century AD, under Stilicho's command, but the details of its legacy remain shrouded in mystery. The Legio I Adriax nevertheless left a triumphant legacy, despite unexpected challenges, from the battles for power during the period of succeeding emperors to struggles in far-off territories.